This is, again, our Creative Acadiana series, which I do in partnership with Marianne Desmarais and Acadiana with our Community Engagement Department. And it's a series of workshops and talks that are funded by Atchafalaya National Heritage Area and LFT, and they're free to the public. So these sort of talks really kind of accentuate the exhibitions that we do, but they also these sort of function as professional development as well. So we have artist roundups, and we have other like artist workshops, which we currently have a public art workshop that's kind of going on, and we change up the scheduling season, so stay tuned for the new stuff. This exhibition is called Dark Wave Light Room and Explorations in the Monochrome, and we're super happy to have Marianne Desmarais and Jessie Poimboeuf, two fabulous artists that I've been knowing your work, and I haven't worked with Marianne yet, but I did work with her husband Jack, and visited their studios and just really admired their work for a long time. And then Jessie Poimboeuf has been an artist I've been aware of and really excited about working with. And we worked last year on an exhibition of his work, and I sort of remembered these pieces, and they were in the back of my mind that I really wanted to explore the work. So I'll just briefly mention your backgrounds, and then we can start a little conversation. So Marianne Desmarais was born in Gulfport, Mississippi, and she lives and works in New Orleans. She's exhibited at the Ogden Museum, the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans, as well as numerous group shows like the 2021 Atlanta Biennial. And her work has traveled internationally in the Imago Mundi collection for the Benetton Foundation. Also a number of residencies as well on her resume, like the Joan Mitchell Center, which is kind of amazing in Banff. And Jessie Poimboeuf lives and works in Acadiana, and is home in the country near Cecilia, Louisiana. This is your 53rd of exhibiting work. That is amazing, Jessie. I love it. Jessie lived and worked out of New York for a long time, and has showcased a number of places like the Hirschorn Museum, which was actually more of a performance piece. Music from Nancy was the name of the piece. And one of the most exciting collaborative works that Jessie's done recently has been the past 17 years. He and Alan Gerson have created 200 paintings on paper titled Ruining Paper. And actually, Alan let us borrow this lovely piece right here, this large-scale photo collage enlargement. I don't know, you have to figure out what we're going to call those things. And Marianne's pieces are right over there, so it's kind of fitting to be sitting between the two. Okie dokie. So, like I said, I was so excited to get these two in an exhibition together and have their works kind of speak to each other. And I feel like there's an intersection of this almost like a rapport with materials, of like seeing potential in the discovery of materials. And these pieces are not necessarily typical of what either of them do. It's one part of a larger whole. Would y'all mind, maybe Marianne first, talking about maybe the sort of the germ of the seed of how the relationship with the materials got started and what the curiosity was, and also maybe describe the pieces in your own kind of words.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Jake, I want to thank you actually for this interesting reason to get together, and I appreciate everyone for spending this beautiful sunny day with us inside to talk about the work. And having met Jessie too, through the work, I see a lot of connections in how we approach what I would call a found object, and I think Jessie, you were calling a found material, right? So I would say that my process is always at the intersection of concept, right, the initial curiosity or idea that I have, fed from the world, and then my consistent interest in material behavior. How, as I start to work, the process allows the materials I work with to influence and change the concept. And I find that I follow those surprises often once I get going. A lot of the materials, for instance, the synthetic rubber that I'm using in this work, start as a liquid, and I have to move rather quickly once I get going. So on some level, it leads me through the form finding in the work. I don't tend to preconceive what the object I end up with is going to be like. I kind of move through the process to find it. And I'm always working in these works with found objects, particularly from contemporary consumer artifacts, so man-made objects that are in our daily lives that perhaps are kind of invisible to us, or at least secondary to the primary object, right? So packing materials, containers, and in the process I was trying to get more out of a single use, right? I was hacking the thing by turning them into molds and substrates and flipping their relationship to value rather than discard, to making them noticeable to us where they're usually a throwaway or something subliminal.
Sort of dwelling for a little bit longer.
Kind of stopping them in time and changing. I like to work with opposites a lot, so the tension between soft and hard, or heavy and light, or durable and fragile or tenuous. So I think of these as kind of, fixity through the fluid process.
And Jessie, a little bit about your works. These came about, you tell a history of working at A&E, and that the photos came to you, found you in a way, and sort of piqued your curiosity and begged for some interaction. Can you just talk about that relationship a little bit?
And I have to thank you again for remembering that you saw these when you came out to my studio when you were putting together the other show. Because I've shown them very little over the years. I showed about 6 of them in New Orleans in, I think, 1991. I was still living in New York. And since then, I have continued to do collages, and I did collages mostly for my own enjoyment, or like for gifts for people, stuff like that. But I've always been interested in it through the influence of Max Ernst with his Woman with 1,000 Heads, and also some other artists, and Rauschenberg we were talking about earlier, and I see the same kind of connections with found objects, and it, either speaking to you or suggesting something, or not really even sure of what it's gonna turn into. But I should take this home, and I'll find out. And all my work, paintings, drawings, performance, all come out of that kind of impulse. And what Marianne said really is very similar to the way that I work. It's a very improvisational way. And that's the way it has to be for me early on, when I have ideas, but when I tried to, you know, have a strict idea and produce it, it just died for me. It was like illustrating an idea, and I got bored with it. So I had to, that interaction with the materials that you find, with the images, and then with my ideas that I bring to it, there's this transformation that happens in the creation of the work. And I can show you a minuscule part of the source material. When I worked at A&E in New York I worked there 8 years, but I started in the PR department and moved to production. But my first job was to, they at the time had the largest contract with bringing BBC programming to America, bigger than PBS. And they would license them for a few years, and when they expired, they were supposed to get rid of all the promotional material, the production shots and everything, and that was my job that I spent probably the first 2 months there just cleaning out their photo frames. And the first day I was there and doing that, I was putting them in these big shopping bags and took 2 big full, I mean they were shopping bags almost this big, and carried them down to the dumpster and put them there. And I just couldn't, while I was still doing it with in the files, it was a huge file. At the end of the day, I went and took them out of the dumpster and took them home on the subway. And so for a couple of months, I was like carrying these almost every day, at least 2 or 3 days a week, these big bags on the subway of photographs.
And there
and
was
this is really a tiny part of what I still have that I can't get rid of. I did a performance one time about finding things and doing stuff, and part of a refrain that I said was, I can't throw anything away. I can't throw anything.
the plight of artists everywhere is the attachment to a raw material and the many ideas that raw material has, you know. One thing that I was thinking about that really links you both is that, so Jesse was mentioning earlier that these photos stem from more BBC archives rather than American broadcasting. And I thought that was really unique because for an American audience, the recognizability of the characters now takes more of a universal rather than a specific sort of thing. And I also think of Marianne's choices in what's cast and what's presented and how it's presented, and the recognizability of it is not apparent until a much deeper kind of reading that it's not even part of the thing. It's about the material and it's about the kind of formal qualities of it, rather than the narrative that either of the characters kind of bring. Does that sort of formal investigation continue on in either of your works? Like, I mean, I feel like Jesse was kind of hinting at it as well, this kind of narrative. Does narrative play any major part of any works, or is it?
So I would say within my work, not a kind of direct communication of narrative. What you were talking about, that kind of moment of recognition, I like to think about the found objects and how they appear in the work as having the quality of slipperiness. They're familiar and there's a moment of recognition, but before you can perceive exactly, like it's not important if you can tell exactly what's there, or even whether it's still there or not there. It's that kind of familiarity that then throws you somewhere else, right? And I would say that my work is abstract work in that way, because I'm not trying to describe a narrative or a figure, although clearly there are objects that are playing the role of figures and new assemblages that are forms, right? So I do want to connect with people's lived experience and their memory of kind of the built world and the objects that surround us, but my goal is to go somewhere else. And I was actually wondering, I was listening to Julie Meritu, the abstract painter, talk about abstraction as a place where she feels free as an artist, right? That you start with the kernel of something, and then that becomes the kind of background or the canvas or where you're working. And as you're working, that moves you and your ideas into some manifestation that wasn't predetermined. And I was wondering that in yours, they're clearly human figures, right? In all of them, Jesse, but then where they're mirrored and kind of either moving back through the collage or expanding into space beyond us. I would say that there is a level of abstraction within these figured works, and I was wondering
I think
how you
I think
think
all work is abstract. And we're dealing with abstract elements, right? And yes, they are recognizable things, and they can be interpreted through that. And I try to avoid using too much of recognizability of particular actors and actresses. But although in some of them you can see that. I mean, Jaik has probably about 50 more of the small ones here that didn't make it into the show. But I meant to ask you to break them out.
Oh, yeah. We got a lot of them here. So. And we'll be able to look at these a little bit later. We'll kind of set after the talk.
Let people handle them. But yes, I would rather not tell somebody what before I hear a response. I mean, that's the way I like to enjoy work and really get to know it or not know it, or that the mystery of it really spurs me on. A lot of the stuff that I like the most, I don't know what to think of at first. A lot of times, but it sticks with me because of that. And that's kind of what I try to put into all of the work that I do, even the performance stuff. That is based on some very specific things, but it also is put together with me. And performance becomes, well, almost all of it. It can be very similar, but I love collaborating with other artists. When I collaborate with Alan Gerson and I. He's a painter who shows at the New Gallery in New Orleans where I am. And we've done it now for 20 years, collaborated for 20 years. And we only paint when we're together. He comes to my studio, and I know that other people who collaborate don't do it that way. They send it back and forth, or we have another. But it seemed to work best for us, and that there wasn't a plan. When we first started, we were just goofing off, and you know, will you tell me what to do, and I'll tell you what to do. But it worked so much better if we just did something, and that's why one time Alan said, I'm going to ruin it. And so we began referring to it as ruined paper. And they're all on paper, various sizes, but roughly some of them the size of enlargements here, and some a little smaller. Nothing too small. And we have done over 200 of them. But I see that connection to what Marianne is saying about responding to a material that has a familiarity to it, but it also has a removed, like styrofoam forms that we use for packing and things like that they're familiar, but when you transform them by covering them with stuff, like casting them in metal, it transforms the whole thing and makes that response of the viewer. Any response by a viewer is acceptable to me except two. I love to be a fly on the wall when people are in the gallery with my work and they don't know I'm an artist, because they're much freer with saying what they. And I really hate this stuff. I love it. That's a very pure response, and You know, I want people to respond. The two things that I don't accept are just mean-spiritedness, or just no response at all. You know, just breathe by. Okay, it's not for everybody.
Now, Marianne, can you talk a little bit about like what your studio practice looks like as far as where the investigation is? I mean, now that I'm sitting here, I'm kind of looking at the multiple bodies of work, or maybe the multiple parts of this body of work, where these pieces here that are framed are kind of a conglomerate of multiple pieces, and then the bronze pieces kind of sit as more of an individual investigation, and then again as more of a conglomeration in the synthetic coating on the table. Where did those things stem from? Where's the play? Where's the gesture even?
Well, all of these works have a shared thread in terms of the post-consumer plastics, single-use plastics. And originally, I had noticed the strangeness of the backing materials, and I cast a couple in plaster because I just wanted to see the solid they would make. And they were beautiful, but they were just plasters. And I thought, well, if I'm really going to work with this, I need to be able to step past that and painted one, and then it just looked like a painted piece of plaster, and you could feel it. Like, you really could feel that that's all it was. And so I remembered from my architectural practice that we can hold dangerous materials in place. You either remove asbestos or you encapsulate it, which means you coat it in a way that it can no longer disintegrate and interact with the space that the space of the building. And so I actually, the synthetic rubber is used in architecture. It's used with flashing, maybe to seal a roof or something that holds water. So I brought that into my studio to play with it. And it's pliable. You can hold it, a very thin sheet of it. So I think of them, Jack called them impossibly thin sculptures, because you can still handle them. That's why, Jesse, I asked you about photographs as found objects, because in a way, probably because I make sculpture and architecture, like I'm interested in the object. And so you can handle things. The rubber moves very differently than paint. And so I can use it in sheets like the one over there, or I can coat or dip things in it. And they're encapsulated completely and seamless, like the keepers, the sculptures over there. The bronzes are quite different, even though they're all part of the same exploration. I used the found object as a mold that I cast wax into, so those are all lost wax sculptures. They're one-ofs, and they're installed on travertine marble because I'm so interested in this idea of the arc of time, where our contemporary artifacts land relative to other artifacts, and that's kind of where the keepers came from, because I wanted to work off the wall, and as I was making those assemblages, they started to remind me of, 12th century reliquaries from Byzantium and African ritual vessels. And I thought, how curious, because the container that the crackers came in didn't seem so special, right? But they have these forms already with, ridges and curves. You all recognize the star shape on the bottle of Gatorade, right? And if you think about the expediency that they need to be produced with, right? The engineering that goes into them. They're really actually striking pieces of human ingenuity. They're also terrible, right? But they have all these facets and they seem ornamental, but they're not, right? They're super thin objects. All those divots and ridges and curves have to do with structural stability to make a very light thing. Some of them have to do with making enough surface to adhere the label. Like, they're all very reasoned, but they look like something else that we recognize, right? Even in the sculptures across the room, I feel like there's a real dialogue between these ideas of what's valuable in human culture. So I was trying to get at that through these different modes of process by handling them and working with them in different ways to really see the thing, right? And because of the way I work, often I still have all the objects, right? I didn't ruin the original piece of plastic, so I haven't rid myself of it. Part of my goal was to deal with every piece of plastic that passed through our household, right? Because it was starting to pile up. And in the pile up, I really started to appreciate the amount of intellectual labor in them, and I just couldn't throw them away. And so it kind of led to all these different paths, distinctly different bodies of work within what I would call a single corpus.
And then you're burgeoning on another investigation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the bells?
Well, maybe not so much in that I find, Jesse, you were talking earlier that if you conceive of something and then make it, it was already killed. And sometimes if I talk about something too much before I do the thing, but I would love to come back
there you go.
with them.
Now, what about you, Jesse? These pieces, is this where they ended, or have they sparked something new over the years? These are from mid-'80s, and then
late, I would say, like 87 through about 93. I did most of it. I did do some when I moved back here in late 93, 94. And I've done a few much larger originals since the whole cost of enlarging them became prohibitive. I was lucky enough that the first, I think, 10 or 12 of them, I was still working at A&E when I had been doing the originals, the small ones, and I did some illustrations for a publication that they were doing in trade for them enlarging some of the pieces for me. And haven't been able to, really come up with the money to enlarge that many more. And you have here too some enlarged pieces that I haven't been able to get into frames yet. There are more of them. And my whole idea when I first started doing them was that, let me do them and then make them big. But then also that as it went on, I was painting. I had a tiny studio in our apartment. I think it was like 13 by 9 feet. And it was great working on smaller things when I first started, like doing some work there, and I was doing some small pastel pieces on handmade paper. But then I began doing some bigger things also. I just, made do. If you ever see those pictures of Francis Bacon's studio, it's not that big. And those big triptychs that he...
Not the space he could walk in.
No.
But I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I did include a few of the smaller pieces with the enlargement, and I feel like they read so different between the two. You begin to discover things at a different rate. Your sort of color palette changes as well. I mean, this is a exhibition of monochromes, but in those monochromes, there's this little bit of color that then becomes noticeable when you quiet everything else down. And I thought that was really interesting as well. Also, maybe some additive pieces too, that added paint. into
And that
one or two
kind of
of them.
was part of my idea too, when I first had the idea that I wanted to enlarge it, was that, and then we maybe make adjustments, and with some of them I have.
Yeah.
And they have also inspired paintings. And in fact, I'm working on a painting right now, several of them have inspired paintings after them that are not just representative of the same thing. It just is a starting point. Composition is like really important. It creates this structure that holds not only the piece and the elements together, but holds the viewer. Gives them this movement throughout a piece. And then yours definitely have that. And I can't wait to hear about the secret stuff.
No, I was just thinking about how these pieces would live on in the future, like those kind of things, like what are the next kind of things. And you talked briefly about your architectural practice as well, which is kind of something that has fed this thinking, you know, and you practice that a lot less these days and more in you're more in sculpture realm. Can you talk a little bit more about that kind of duality of
Sure.
both ways of working and investigation?
Yeah, I would say that they absolutely are linked, but very distinct practices. The drivers and the freedoms within each are different. Architecture really definitely trained me in composition. I can see it in yours too, because you're a trained designer. I think the way you handle the edge of keep maintaining the margin of the photo struck me in your compositions, Jesse. But so those sensibilities to detail, to structure, to combinations of different materials and how they move or don't move, right? Absolutely underpins, like that is my working knowledge in my art studio. The biggest difference, well, art hopefully, luckily finds an audience. In the studio, it's yourself with the work in a way, right? I don't actually think about the audience at all. I'm present in the work and I'm responding and being influenced by what's happening in the process. In architecture, it's very collaborative with the client, with the inhabitants of the building, with the environment, and then with the process of getting something built. It's just a completely different way of working, but my attention to materiality, to how actually we experience materiality. I'm very interested in architecture with what I would call the touch surface, how the actual body or person's emotions respond to the built space, and that often to me has to do with tempering scale, so that one person can find a comfortable place within a larger expansive space or within the building. I'm really interested in that, and so materiality and the size of things in that practice are similar in a way, because I'm quite interested in how your body feels in front of these objects, where you're drawn to touch. I mean, I think I make a lot of work where you really want to handle it. And that tactility is, I think, deeply human, and that crosses across the practices. But I'm really thrilled when I'm in my art studio in a way that is quite different than the business practice of architecture.
I can speak a little bit to that materiality. That's very important to me too. In that the digital age hadn't happened yet, and I did most of these.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think it would be the same thing if I did them digitally.
It is nice to see them in this context. You know, we were just talking about the age range of the pieces here. And yeah, starting to revisit works that were created before iPhones, before Photoshop. Well,
In another century.
I mean, yeah, another century. But I'm sorry, yeah, keep going.
But the cut edge to me was very, very important. It was, you know, everybody's seen the pictures of Matisse cutting those big, you know, shapes that he did, and then putting them together. I really felt a connection to that, a connection to Max Ernst. He used in a lot of his collage stuff old engravings that he dismembered and put back together. And seeing those edges was very important to me. I didn't want it to be too cleaned up, and you can do that in digitally, you know. And I don't think I would if I could. And the feeling of using the scissors and an X-Acto knife was very, very similar to drawing and that materiality. And the experience of the viewer too, to me, it's important to. Of course, you know it's an object. Even these, compared to the more three-dimensional works, they are an object. And there is a dimension between the cut edges and the where it's applied to and next to. And I did teach. Like most artists, serious artists, if you really are committed to your work and you don't have a continual teaching job or family money or a benefactor that supports that, you have a day job. And I've had a lot of them. And some of them I hated, but at the same time, after that, and I didn't get a teaching job until 10 years out of graduate school. And I felt like I brought a little bit something different to the classroom. That experience with real world and how that related to our responses to materials. I worked on the riverfront in New Orleans with these huge, what they're called lash vessels. They're the size of aircraft carriers. And what they do is they load the tugboat. They have a port at the end of the ship, and they are massive. These huge tugboats bring whole barges, and they lock into them and lift them up and stack them 4 or 5. It's like container vessels, but on a much huger scale. And they were designed by a marine architect out in New Orleans, actually. And seeing that stuff up close and the materials, the rusted iron and all of that was very, very exciting to me as an artist.
Nice. Yeah, and I had a thought. I
know that materiality.
Yeah, materiality, and you know, I was thinking about that. You know, I'm really glad that you said that. You know, these are objects. I mean, like each and every one of these kind of pieces, even the drawings. You know, the graphite on paper, the materiality of that. It was very interesting. I went to the Houston Art Fair. It was an Entitled Art Fair in Houston. It was a weekend or two ago, and I noticed the younger painters using less materiality. It was really weird. They were images that played really well on a digital screen, but less satisfying in person. And I went through, and I mean, there were very few that I was like, oh, this is what I came for. It's like this materiality, this like satisfaction of being in front of an object, even if it's a two-dimensional object or you know, more of a drawing kind of thing. And I feel like you know, I can say that all of these pieces in here really feel like that kind of satisfaction, like being in front of something.
Yeah, I think the need to slow your thought there, but that whole idea to me me, especially in the way that the digital world has sort of taken over so much, that people think that if they view it on a laptop or their phone, they've seen it. But you don't experience it. It's like, you know, and digital, it's a tool,
Yep.
and it can be used very good. I'm sure you saw some of that work, and I had to. But I try to get that across to them whenever I taught, that whenever possible, you should try to see the real thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great way to see such a variety of work.
The digital revolt.
Yeah, it's like he's out of here. The iPhone is.
I was insulted.
That's it. But yeah, I mean, that same thing about seeing a history book, your art history books, you know, and then going.
Slides.
Yeah, or slides. And
Which
then,
don't exist
yeah, and
anymore.
then going to see the actual thing. Yeah, we were recently talking about the Rauschenberg exhibition at the Manil, the textile pieces, and wow, just the materiality of that, the presence of it actually, and you know, coming into your space, they were really playing with installation there, but still rooted to the wall in a lot of ways, playing with balance and just super radical and exciting, and you don't get that when you're looking at a screen. So Jack and Marianne, you have to go. It's a mission.
When you see them, yeah, it's a whole different experience. Because you experience it because of the physicality of it, and you experience it with all your senses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I really try to get through to students and young artists that I meet. You know, it's a great way to see a lot of stuff, but you really need to. And seeing the dates on some of those Rauschenberg things
Yes.
are astounding.
Yeah. And then your performance practice is in the experiential, firmly rooted in experiential kind of world. Can you talk a little bit about that? How that kind of stemmed from the earlier practices that were more drawing?
I mean, I like Marianne saying that she loves being in her studio. That's, you know, and that's a happy place. Definitely, it's where I want to be most of the time. Definitely. But I played a little music some years back and played in a band, and I always envied musicians because they got together to do it, and that collaborative experience is what my performances came out of. First performance I ever did was in 1977, first few years of the CAC in New Orleans. And there was a show called Louisiana Environments. And I really put together this group of people that I worked with using music and sound and projections. It was very, you know, and then also costuming too, really. I think growing up in Louisiana, costuming, you know, we all had a connection to performance through Mardi Gras. Even if you don't want to, you can't avoid it when it happens.
And
I was going to ask Jesse a question too. You mentioned the small, tiny studio, tiny paintings, right? When we were talking about the enlargements or the idea of shifting scale. And I wondered if performance, I don't know if the dates line up, if performance became also a way to expand the scale at which you work, right? Because it's a much larger scale.
Out into human scale.
Right, and also
not just on the wall or
not just
standing
visual
free.
perception, right? But
Right.
yeah, so my secret project will involve sound, right? This kind of auditory experience that is a much larger scale, links to memory in a different way.
Get that.
I love it. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Mardi Gras because that's how I describe so many facets of Mardi Gras to all my friends. I'm like, you know, they're in Portland, Oregon. What's that like? What's Mardi Gras like? And I'm like, well, you know, there's a certain touristy aspect to it, but there's also a very performative art where the audience is the performer is the audience. give and take. So,
living in New York, whenever people would ask me about it, I would like to go sometime and see it. I said, well, you can do that, but you really need to become it.
yeah.
And
yeah.
to me, my parents were really kind of into it. They never really costumed or masked that much. They wore a mask, usually a simple mask. But they always took us. My dad would took us to all the parades. There weren't as many as there are now.
Right.
But it gave me this sense that, and to me, it's you can become something else. You can become someone else, even just for one day, the day of Mardi Gras, or whenever the crew you're involved with or want to be with. Don't just come to see it.
Yeah.
Experience it.
Yeah. Dive in.
Yeah. And it's a little scary.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, performance art is scary, as some people do. I mean, a lot of times I'm in the performance art area, and thrill and excitement of I don't know what's going to happen with this, but okay, we're in for a ride. Should we throw it to the audience for some questions? What do you think? What you got?
Jesse, I want to ask you a technical question. On these pieces, was it a large view camera that you projected to develop these?
I think that in New York at the time that it was, they were making photo enlargements like the largest that anybody could do then. And I knew the name of the company that did it, but it was just, AD had an account with them, and that's how I got to do it. But I didn't go there. I didn't go oversee them. I sent the.
You didn't see the technical aspect?
No, I would like to have, but they didn't want me to.
Because the technology doesn't exist. Well, it exists, but it doesn't. It's not like modern age.
Right.
Downtown doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
In New York.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, and stuff does circle back. So hopefully that there's enough of an interest among artists and technicians that do want to do it and preserve it.
Because this seems much richer than anything.
Oh God, I was like blown away.
Spectacular.
I was blown away when I saw the quality. I didn't expect that at all. I expected almost like Xerox quality.
Right.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God. So I did it in 2 groups. It was like, 6 or 8 at a time, and did these little illustrations, which I hated doing, but that's what allowed me to do it on their account. But yeah, it blew me away with the quality of them, the richness.
Steve Bro, what you got?
Well, I just have a couple of comments for each of you, actually. One of the things that when you mentioned that these were coming from the BBC, they're images that really informs the imagery itself. In a way that, and it's funny, is the thing I thought about immediately was the Beatles, and just how the Beatles, they just do what they do, and they're coming off so British, right? But also in some of the way that they would record, and I'm thinking of I'm the Wallace in particular, in which they use in the background, they piece together and cut into, put into the song pieces of Shakespeare performances, British Shakespeare performances, and that to me it really resonates. Also, the idea that you mentioning working with digital, make it into Photoshop and working that way, but these images are so filmed. They sing with film, and which made me think that the images themselves are really cinematic. A lot of them,
Yes.
and I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of people, love black and white. love old black and white films, especially the era of like film noir and stuff like that. The content are so rich. Look, The Third Man, I think one of the most perfect films ever made.
And for Marianne, one of the things that I had to really resist, almost pull my hand back from touching it, you know, so it's free.
I'm watching.
They're electrified.
Don't worry, it's a common problem with this lovely exhibition.
It was really hard to resist. One of the things about the framed ones, so like almost like transitioning or being in two different kinds of, you know, two-dimensional drawing almost, and then actually kind of sculptural, and they also remind me that of like covering, almost possessing, burying, and almost to the point where you don't want the real interior form to really come out. You have the exterior, right? But there's something else in there that is like trapped. And I find that really interesting. And it doesn't do that when you're transitioning into bronze. It's something different, totally different. And just on that point, on both of these, I'm reminded of Jasper Johns. If you've seen his bronzes, that he would, you know, the sculpture, which he really was influenced a whole lot with the French surrealist. And it's almost, I mean, he's really going really close, but it has that kind of aspect to it, and kind of a gridded, there's like a strict gridded aspect. Different than I guess you call them the others.
The keepers.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you for the range of those comments. I was, for the draped piece, I think of them as draped. We were in Rome looking at some marble sculptures, and there are sculptures where they're actually draped. It's all carved in marble, but it's veiled, often women. But I was really interested in the idea of how we wrap bodies in life and in death, and the idea that when you drape something, you conceal some parts of it, but you heighten our perception of other parts, so there's a reveal to it. And this idea that even working with the almost two-dimensional thin sheet of rubber, the air is actually, the air of the fold, to me, is what recognizes them as objects or a sculpture, right? Even the lift between the sheets of photographic images, right? And so on some level, those recognize their objectness. And I'm really interested in how objects oscillate. You know, they recede back. You might read them as concave or convex. They change as you move around them. You might have noticed that in the draped forms, there's actually a sparkle in the synthetic rubber, because I had years of glitter from when our child was young, and then I realized how terrible that stuff is, and now I have to swallow it. And so I'm encapsulating that within the layer. And I also had seen these fabulous paintings by an artist named Taboo during COVID. He was painting the New York City skyline out his apartment window, and he actually used glitter, and it reminded me of Van Gogh. It was his kind of contemporary version of Starry Night. And I thought, oh, I have glitter. I mean, I live in New Orleans, I have glitter. and I thought it was going to be splashy and not monochromatic, right? And somehow I've managed to make glitter subtle, because it's captured within that surface and only kind of reveals itself slowly as you move. Now I've forgotten all your brilliant points because I've run off on something that thrills me, but
well, like a conceptual thing about being possessing, burying, you know, really, you know, hiding, and it's black, right? So it's got all these connotations that are possible. I'm
Right.
not saying you intended any of that.
Sure. Yeah. What I really am intrigued by working with black is its expansiveness. I know it can be menacing. Sometimes after I make a work, I wonder if people read it that way. For me, it's not menacing at all, but I recognize that. In black in particular, I find that it makes the form very legible. And I also love its reflective quality, so that you can really start to see almost like the surface of the water in Christie's photograph, or the way it feels to walk on the edge of water at night, where you can almost experience the softness of it, and the world feels deeper than it does during the day. And so I haven't felt compelled to move beyond black because it's such a rich space. The bronzes, the surface quality is quite different, but also has some of that same expansiveness and maybe more of a link through time, right? The synthetic rubber is very contemporary. Well-ish, right? That happened during wartime when it was hard to get real natural rubber, and so American chemists worked to be able to make tires without having to source something on through global trade, and was the advent of synthetic rubber. So contemporary back to the 30s. But bronze, on the other hand, really reaches back through time, and it pulls these other, I start to think about war when I look at some of those objects now, right? They look like ammunitions or serious durable goods, and bronze was first used in weaponry before it ever made it into the Renaissance art, right? Now we think about bronze as something with inherent value, and I can't wait to make more, but it's hard to produce without a benefactor. But so I think all of these things are engaged in both the form and the materiality of them.
And also they're not just black.
Right.
Because the light itself makes different shades of
Absolutely.
dark and light.
Yeah.
And I think what you said about women touch, that really relates to, I think, any artist. It's kind of like you want your piece to want to be touched, but you don't.
Right. Yes.
Because it's just impractical. But I fantasized one time that there should be a dispensation card that some artists get to have, because they have respect with the touch, but they can touch all the stuff.
For the record, artists are the worst.
Yes.
Just gonna say. And actually, and the more delicate their works, the worse they are. Ceramicists, bottom of the list.
I would, a project that I feel like I could talk about but I haven't done yet with the bronzes, I have this fantasy of installing them in public places, for instance on a park bench, so that someone could experience it as an object they can touch, but also like the plastic cup that's under the park bench. I'd like to kind of repopulate the world with the objects. If you ever have traveled where they have bronze objects in the public realm, like the places people touch are these bright spots, right? A brightness of 1,000 touches. I really think it's terrific to be able to do that.
Even the thought of thinking about that happening all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I see another question?
I have a question now. When you cut out your chosen images, do you have a preconceived idea of the complete finished product, or are you like, oh, I'm cutting this object out because this is interesting, or and then are you making the story up as you go?
I almost never have a preconceived idea about it. I'm responding to something. This is a nice image, but it also is a nice shape and so that's when I'm reinforcing when I cut it. And then I have these pieces that, you know, and I may not use them in this one, but maybe another one. I usually work on several. I always work on several pieces at a time in my studio. I like, you know, going from one to the other. Gives me time to think. You know, I probably think and look more than actually work.
Do you discover that when you finish a piece, you're like, oh, that came from like a memory or an experience?
Sometimes, yeah. That, oh well, yeah. I can see how that influenced the way I put that together, or put those images together. Absolutely, and in painting also, it's the same kind of thing because I do combine different things. Jack and I were talking earlier about watching birds, and when I lived in New York, I never did landscapes before, and I started doing Louisiana landscapes, and I realized that it was because I was missing it, and I started doing them bigger. I started with those pastels on handmade paper that were maybe about 11 by 13 inches, but then I wanted them to be bigger. And when I did them bigger, they made my studio seem bigger because of the space that I was describing. And so it was a great experience in discovery of that. And when I moved back to Louisiana, I moved into the country, and I had never really lived in the country before. I live along Bayou Teche near Cecilia, and the birds populated the landscapes that I was looking at. And so I couldn't ignore them. And so I began doing a lot of birds, and I still do, but not just exclusively that. Thanks for reminding me about that.
You got another question? Maybe I have a question or two. I mean, I already have a few. The continual practice, what keeps the studio going? What's some secrets? Because I need to get at my studio, to be honest, you know.
Well, I think number one, spending time in the studio, even if it's just to read a book or to walk through. I tend to move things around. But I also, I cook a lot, and I think about my cooking as a continuous practice, right? The leavings from one meal, the vegetables you peeled or the bones turn into the stock that become the seed for the next thing you make. And so the studio for me is very much like that. And this idea of collecting things that lead your curiosity, or that you just find interesting, and then they tend to have this almost magnetic draw towards other things, and then all of a sudden you're composing, even if you were walking through for something else. So just making sure that you're open to that you, I don't know, catalog your thoughts in a way, whether it's in writing or marks, right? Everything's a mark. And so just that kind of willingness to let your impulses happen and being in there. I also find there's a cycle. I go through incredibly productive times and times that are lulls or day jobs, right? But that you kind of have these arcs, right? It's a yeah.
Yeah, there are no secrets, but it is a matter of being there and paying attention, or not paying attention.
Right.
Both work, and yeah, just I would always say this. I said it to friends, and I used to say it to my students that ideas are great, but they don't exist until you do something. You gotta be present and do something.
And to pull Jack into our conversation yet again, he often says to me, "Go back into your studio and reclaim yourself if it's been too long," and it's absolutely true.
And I like that idea of cataloging your thoughts. Like, I feel like I hadn't thought about it that way, but that applies. So it applies across, I mean, it opens the studio into other realms, like, because I've been thinking about my curatorial practice as well, like cataloging those thoughts are just as important. And then I loved also, I think, carrying on your notion of the secondary objects. And I feel like you and I, when we were talking in your studio, you had mentioned it and it just stuck in my head. And I feel like that's such a great way of thinking about the world and your pieces in particular, and their kind of function. And so, yeah, I feel like I keep picking up vocabulary words as I have these conversations.
And like Marianne said, there's different ways of cataloging. I have kept journals. I began doing them in 1971, and they aren't real linear. They're piecemeal, which is the way I experience everything and the way my ideas go. I've kept notes about dreams, and sometimes it's just 2 or 3 words, but if you do that, it brings back so much. And then it's just other things, little snippets of things. That I used to do, well, in New York, I love the subway. I think it was the best way to travel down, but you overhear sorts of stuff that are disjunct from the context. And I love that. And in New Orleans, they really had a great public service, buses and streetcars and stuff. I did it a lot for a long time, and overhearing things out of context, I just love that still.
Especially in New Orleans.
I used to keep a box of ideas because I'm so nonlinear, I can't even commit to a book. So I just had a wooden box that I would put my scraps, whether marks or words, text, and I keep it in the box. And in lulls, you can go through it like a box of family photos.
I love it.
Yeah. I used to tell my students to assemble a catalog of tries. You don't even have to name your attempt or even commit to making an attempt of something. Just make a mark to register your thought and assemble this catalog of tries. It moves your thinking forward.
Yeah, you don't have to formalize it in a book or
You will have done, right?
Yes.
Because it's putting in the work, but you can sometimes let your thinking emerge, right?
I love that. All right, y'all. We have a room full of artists, and I think we need to pause this conversation and continue it in a group. So stick around.